Hello everyone, Fancy here, coach of the West Virginia Weasels, and today we will be going over the Sinnoh power rankings with myself and Coltrainz.
Hello, I'm Coltrainz, and I am the coach of the Portland Pelipers. Before we get into this real quick, I just want to say this is the power rankings for Sinnoh, and I believe this is the lowest skill division in NPBA server. Is that correct, Fancify?
I believe so, yes.
All right, and before we get into it, I did kind of take that into account a little bit in my power rankings. I tried not to be too harsh. But that being said, I actually quite like most of the teams here. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think for the most part, all the teams are, they all have some good parts to them, so I think we can go through and discuss those and point those out.
All right, then let's jump straight into our first team here. All right, we got the Lethal Lopunnies. You want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. So I actually really like this team. I have this as my second team, and that's only because I like the first team that I have. I just think is like very ideal, and it looks like something I'd draft. But I think this one is a very close second. Having the really good speed tiers, 108, 130, 142, it covers a lot very well. The only like thing that I could see would be maybe like offensive 85s being an issue speed tier wise if they can go modest or adamant nature like the Nido Kings of the world.
hmm this team has a lot good going for it. I'll be releasing my rubric after this video goes live for the rest of Sinnoh, but it hits everything I'm looking for, except for just a few very small nitpicks that brought it down for me. Uh, and
Mhm.
those could be, they could be very easily patched up, and they might not even need to be realistically. They're just missing a
Yeah,
few hazard setters, in my opinion. A fire type missing up the fire, water, grass core. But outside of that, it's a very solid team across the board. Amazing
yeah,
offensive pressure between Dragapult and Scissor and Tapu Koko, which is amazing first three picks. Uh, Scissor really helps shore up the defensive side, and Dragapult and Tapu Koko are both mons that can be run on either side of the spectrum. Most of the time they'll be run special, but they can also be physical mons, so it's going to be very hard to prep for.
yeah. This team looks like it's going to be a problem. Um, Although there are a lack of hazard setters, the lack of the plethora of removers rather are going to be
hmm
good with Scizor, Coco, Donphan. It's just I'm afraid with this team because of that it might be played more passive than it needs to. But outside of that, I think this team's great.
Yeah, as long as it keeps dropping Draco Meteors and Hydro Pumping with Keldeo and making sure none of those miss, then this team
Yeah,
will be ripping through teams.
yeah.
I think that's all I have to say for them. Very solid across the board.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot you can
Really
find
good
fault here.
start. Mhm. Really good first team here.
And then we have the Tail of Triple Threats. We both agreed this team is number one here.
Yeah. You want
And
to go ahead and talk about this one?
it's not hard to see why. This team
Mhm.
has a lot. I mean, it checks all of my boxes I'm looking for. Uh, I think Pig Knight was a wonderful last pick. Very efficient use of its points. Just solidifies all the different cores. It's kind of bad to have it be holding both of them, but I'm not going to hold him against it too bad. You got
Mhm.
offensive threats and Zero Aura. Mew is one of the most versatile mons in draft. Celesteela is always a nightmare every time I see it come. I don't think I've seen Celesteela do bad once in draft. There's just so much good. Hits four setters, four removers. Good at water killing. I believe in my notes I said all of the Pokemon on this team get toxic, which is just a nightmare for
That
walls.
is. Mhm.
It's a fantastic team. What's your thoughts?
So my initial thoughts on this team, when I first like glanced at it, I saw Zeraora, Lantern, Rotom Frost, and I thought, okay, electric spam's not necessarily ideal, but like the more I looked at this team, it does good with breaking through ground types. Through even like the likes of Rotom Frost, Roserade is great offensively. It has Froslass to break as well as Lantern. I think that they can keep the momentum up well with Zeraora, Hydreigon, and anything else. They have the slow momentum, of course, in Lantern to be able to set up with the likes of Mew and Celesteela. And yeah, there's just a lot I like about this team. There wasn't really any flaws that I saw. Looking at it, I mean, I'm not typically the biggest fan of Froslass, so um, the speed tiers for my personal side might be awkward. because you might need Frostlass to come. But other than that, that's being very nitpicky. I think that this team's great.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Frostlass either, but it does its job. I guess the biggest thing I kind of notice is that there's a lack of setup sweepers.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know I mean, Mew can kind of do it, Hydreigon can kind of do it, you know,
Yeah, I think
Celesteela can kind of
Celesteela.
do it,
Hmm.
Togekiss may be on like a really good day, but none of
Yeah,
them are just, being like, well, if I come in, I just have a threat to set up and sweep you.
yeah.
That's
I
probably
feel
my
like it's.
only downside I see.
Yeah, I feel like that's. He's very situational with his setup sweepers, but the thing is, he can typically go special or physical. So, like looking at Celesteela, you could always run a physical set versus special set with Autotomize. You could go Bulk Up or Calm Mind Mew, and then you could go Dragon Dance or Nasty Plot Hydreigon. So it's just going for the matchup.
Yeah, it really is. But I think that's enough on this team. We've been just praising it this
Yeah,
entire time.
yeah, exactly. Got to get to some of the other ones. Give them some love as well.
And right into the Freeport Fletchings. Uh, Now the first three teams start off just incredibly strong here.
Hmm. We'll
This
act like
team,
that's not due to draft order.
yeah, but you know, I think if you look at the Johto Power rankings that were just done, most of the people
Hmm.
at the bottom of the draft were actually rated the highest, so you never know.
That's true.
Um, but this team has a lot.
Hmm.
Like just looking at it, your cores are all there. I knocked it barely for having only three removers.
Hmm.
It's got pretty much everything else. I mean, Jirachi's an incredible versatile mon. Kieran Black is always terrifying. Um,
Yeah.
Sticky Webs with Galvantula, priority speed tiering Talonflame. I think is pretty good across the board. What are your thoughts?
I just feel like this team is going to be troublesome for balanced teams, and I noticed like looking at this this um region like the Sinnoh teams that there are a lot of balanced teams and hyper offense potential through the Primarina, the Kieran Black, everything else. I feel like it's going to do especially well if Galvantula can consistently get up webs. Um, and yeah, I think that this team is really good offensively, and of course, I'm always biased towards Miltank. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that in our other power rankings video, but having three great abilities, Thick, Fat, Scrappy, and Sap Sipper, all of which this team could potentially need. That's the only really downside I see is you could be put in situations where you have to go Wish past Jirachi to keep Miltank healthy. But I feel
Mhm.
like if this team plays more towards a hyper offensive style, that it's going to do very well, which is why I ranked it so high due to
Yeah,
this.
and I think it can. I think it can do that as well. I look at it and it's not a crazy Volt Turn core, but
Hmm.
Jirachi, Talonflame, Galvantula. I think there's another one in there. I think Morpeko gets parting shot. There's a couple. Uh,
Hmm.
and if they keep using their pivot moves well, I think they could definitely keep the offensive pressure up. Just gotta get there. I think some matchups will be worse than others, depending on the team, but overall, I definitely see this team going far.
Yeah, it's just going to be all about momentum, whether it's able to keep the hazards up. Because if the opponent does get stealth rocks up, although they do have removers, those removers are Talonflame and Articuno. So it's not exactly ideal hazard removers. But
Mm.
I feel like if this team could just keep momentum going and use flip turn Primarina, you've got Jirachi, just get Kieran Black in as many times as you can. I have a feeling it's going to be one of the top 5 kill leaders this season.
I agree. And then I think we move on here, unless there's anything
Hmm.
else you want to say.
No, I think we pretty much covered all that there.
All right, and a team that we have a very actually disagreeing opinion on, although I love their logo, very cute.
Hmm.
Since you rated it highly, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so looking at this team, I really like Mega Glade a lot, and I think that there are a lot of complements very well to go with it, such as um, being able to switch into flying types well. You've got Heatran, you have Runerigus. That's what I'm going to say for it, but
I've always
um,
pronounced it Runegrigus.
okay,
I don't think that's
but
correct, but
But yeah, I feel like this team just does very well offensively. It's more of a balanced style, which I think works best for Mega Glade. The only thing that I can really like dock it for is that Slow King a majority of the time is probably going to have to come physically defensive, just because like the fighting types aren't necessarily um like they are going to be a problem. Apologies. But I feel like Slow King coming Fizz Def is not going to be ideal. But I think that this team overall is going to be very well balanced, and I'm a real big advocate for Obstagoon. So I'm glad that someone brought that up, and having a Dark Wall Breaker to help with Mega Glade, I think is going to work out very well.
Yeah, and while I have 11th here out of 16 on my power ranking, that is deceptively like still pretty high up. This team still scored higher than most of my teams in Hoenn. It's just that
Mhm.
most of the teams here in Sinnoh, surprisingly, uh, I found to be very solid teams. And this is like saying that this is the one of the worst kids in class when he got an A minus, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, and there's just a lot to like on this team that you've pretty much hit the point. You know, Mega Galide's fantastic. I do think Nooking shoulders a fair amount of the burden. It won't come every week, but then Heatran will have to shoulder that burden instead if Nidoking doesn't come, so it kind of makes the team a little bit predictable.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of lack of good cohesion amongst the team with a massive weakness to Rock and Ghost. Certain Pokemon will just tear through this team. Being weak to Stone
Yeah.
Edge never is a great thing, but
I
you
just
know,
feel like this team is what last one was trying to do, but it has a more diverse breaker group.
mm,
So like you have Rabombi, which is like better than Galvantula, at least in my opinion,
I
just
love
because it has
Rabombi.
the
It's probably
Quiver
like
Dance.
my top five favorite Pokemon. So
Yeah, but I think that having webs for this team especially is going to be great. That way, Heatran can come offensively. It's not always going to be forced into more of a defensive role, and giving webs to the likes of Thunder's Therian's never going to be good. And I think that it similar to the last team, if you can get up webs with this type of team, it's going to be very hard for um, others to break through.
yeah, very good. And I think we
Okay,
should
and
move on
then
to the next one here.
that's all I've got for that one as well.
The Palisades. Now I have them ranked a little bit higher, so I'll go ahead and take this immediately. Just let
Okay.
me pull up my page on them. So I guess I'll start with where I docked them some points. Uh, Specifically, Bronzong being the big part of your Psychic Dark fighting core.
Hmm.
Ugh, it really is. Bronzong is a strong defensive Pokemon, but also kind of has to hold up against the dragons and the other psychics of the world, and it will. I feel like it will slowly get whittled down on this team. Uh,
Hmm.
Technically, Wheezing is a poison type, and I give full points for having a grounded poison. Technically, it is, but it's always going to be wanting to run Levitate. And so in my rubric where I said you either get 1 or 0 on this category, this team was the one special snowflake that got a 0.5, which infuriates
Yeah.
me. Um, I took very minor points away from speed tiers, but what gets me more is like both the hazard setting and removal kinda it's good but not great with 3 and 3. What I do like about the team, however, is that you got your very obvious Hail Core between Alolan Ninetales and Arctozolt, and if I am correct, you have a Regen Core with Tangrowth and Tornadus T, which both function really nice and I think support the Vaporeon on this team as well. If Vaporeon is allowed to give wishes to Bronzong, I think this is actually an oddly deceptively strong defensive core
Hmm.
that will be very hard to break. Uh, and if they're able to keep that, like, I guess in a way, defensive momentum, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
uh, then they'll eventually be able to come in with Arctozolt and just take games, which I think is
Hmm.
a kind of obvious play style, and that most of your opponents are going to see that coming and be able to prep for it. But I don't think it's a very weak style. I mean, I ran Rain last season and I came second. It's just whether or not your opponents can respond to it. And I think this team will have
Yeah.
a very good time making opponents. weak to their very obvious playstyle.
Hmm. See, I'm not the biggest fan of Hail, so that was one reason why I docked it like that. And I've seen the Arctazelt copy pasta, and it does break through really well. But like you were saying about the speed tiers, I really don't like almost relying on Arctazalt to be under Hail to get that like 110 speed tier ish range. Like I'm glad that it's there with the Ninetales, so that way you do have some form of speed control. I could also see some like hybrid of a Trick Room variant potential with Bronzong and Delmice and whatever else you may have in offensive Tangrowth. I do like the regen core with Tornadus and Tangrowth, but I feel like this team also really relies on Vaporeon. So if you are able to have a team that can break through balance, so similar to the one with Primarina, Karen Black, Jirachi, if you can um, just break through the Vaporeon, I feel like this team could potentially struggle against like offense. So, because like you were mentioning, the Bronzong is going to get whittled down. Eventually, Tangrowth will get whittled down, and I like its potential. I feel like there's just something missing, and for me, it's like an offensive fighting type. I feel like that would be something that would go through with this team
Hmm.
very well. But again, I'm not sure what you would necessarily switch out because you do need the ground type. So you have the likes of Palisand. It's just there's one thing missing for me.
It'd have to be a restructure too. I know exactly what you're talking about because immediately what I'd look out to cut is Incineroar, but then you're missing both a fire and a dark. To maybe
Hmm.
get like a fire fighting, that would work really well, but then you have to refill in your dark slot, which makes it just a bit annoying across the board.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like this team definitely does have potential, and I'd love to see Arctazord on the kill leader.
Yeah, and I think if it's played correctly, I think you will.
Hmm.
Right next to Kieran Black.
Hopefully above it though, for the memes.
Yeah, for the memes.
But that's all I had for this team.
All right, and then we will move on. All
Okay,
right.
so
Then we have the
I've got
Amsterdam Arceuses, and I'll let you take this originally.
okay, yeah. So I've got this one a little higher than yours there. I really like the Dragon Fairy Steel Core here. I think that that is a great building piece to go on with the Clefable, the Latios, and Mega Scizor. The hazard removal options with the likes of the Latios, Mega Scizor are very well, and the Prankster Defog from Vullaby, as well as having the Rapid Spin and Glaring Mr. Mime, although it won't necessarily come all the time. I feel like that is always an option. That, and I'm a big advocate for Gourgeist. I think typically it's always good value to draft Gourgeist, and on this team especially, it works out really well as you have the Swampert and you have the Wish Pass with Clefable to keep them healthy, and you've got slow momentum with Electros, and you have obviously like faster momentum with Urshifu and Mega Scizor. I feel like this team just gels really well together. The only thing that I would necessarily like change would be the lack of fire type. I feel like even a cheap value fire type would have been good, like a Pignite esque um, pick there. Something like a Pyroar maybe would even be good. It'd cover a speed tier there.
Hmm. And maybe looking back on this, I was maybe a little bit harsh, but the team wouldn't be that much higher for me. But maybe it would have gone up one or two slots. Mega Scissor Clefable, wonderful pairing, right? Urshifu Single and Latios, another wonderful pairing. One of the hardest hitting physical and Pokemon in the game with one of the hardest hitting special and Pokemon in the game. Just a wonderful first four. And I don't think it gets all that much weaker as you go down. That being
Mm-hmm.
said, this team has a massive weakness to Fairy, an incredible weakness to Fairy.
Yeah.
Um, sure, you have Mega Scizor and Clefable there to hold it off, but like if you're ever looking to bring Volibee, it's hit. Urshifu and Latios both hit by Fairy. Neither of them, and they both invite the fairies in. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Drapion, another weakness to Fairy, and not a whole lot to shore it up, which is where I took a lot of points for because Fairies, every team should have one. And if you can't deal with the opponent's Fairies, a lot of the time it will just come to kill you at the very end. It will end your match. We see
Mm-hmm.
that with a lot of matches that have happened already, and matches that have happened in the past year. Um, I took off very minor points for speed tiering because you kind of stay clumped up in your areas, nothing breaks north
Mhm.
of 115, and then you kind of be a little bit on the slow side after Drapion, but it's not the worst. A
Yeah.
very good team overall. I think it has a lot going for it. Hits every
Mhm.
other box I have outside of missing the fire. It's just, I don't know, while those first four are very, very solid, I feel like outside of good flip volt turning, I feel like there's just something missing for me this time.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, I guess I didn't necessarily see that big fairy weakness right off the bat, so that is something that could be prominent, but even you have the likes of Clefable to potentially switch into it, although it might not be ideal. You can run like bulky Clefable sets and
Mm.
take on most fairies there.
Yeah, but typically you want, I feel like, Fable to be physically defensive, right? And you're kind of committing most. I feel like most fairies are specially,
That's true.
you know.
It's very true. Hmm. I could see where that gap could be an issue there for that team.
Yeah, I think that's why I ended up a little bit lower. Although, like I said, it's
Hmm.
still a fantastic team. Any other thoughts on your end?
Not for this team, no.
Yeah, as long as I think it can leverage its your Shifu Latios Scissor Clefable core, which I think it'll bring
Hmm.
most weeks. It'll do fine, but it's a little predictable, and that's it for me.
Okay.
All right, we got the Goku Gumballs, and I'll let you take this one as well because you've rated it higher than I have.
Okay. So this team is looks very scary offensively. You have Como, Megamanectric, Landorus, Zarude, Cinderace. You just have seemingly a bunch of offensive threats. It almost, at first glance, feels as if it's going to be hyper offensive. But then you have stuff like the Tapu Fini that could potentially wall the Copper Jaw, can kind of take hits. It's not an ideal steel type, but I feel like for this team, it doesn't necessarily need to be the fairy switch in because you have the Slowking Galar to help with that. I like Komala here as a rapid spinner and Wish Pass to go with this team, and all the wall breakers are good. I feel like it has a good mix of physical and special. The only problem I have is your Earthquake switch in is Landorus Incarnate, and I feel like that's going to be a big issue for this team.
Yeah, and looking at my notes, that's the very first thing I note with this team. That my very first note is that I'm conflicted, and then the second note is that Landorus is your only ground immunity, really, uh, and it feels very odd to me.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I ran Landorus on uh, one of my previous drafts, and it was a very high power draft. I got Landorus and like Mega Lottie, so that was like the kind of power we were playing with, right?
Yeah.
But it it did well, but never quite put in the crazy amount of work. I had kind of like a slower, bulkier team, and that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
what this team reminds me of. Um, and like Landorus is I feel like your poster child of wall breaking.
Mm-hmm.
And he sits on the very top of this team, very strong wall breaker, and you have good ways to get him in with flip turns, U-turns, volt switches, not volt switch, volt, yeah, volt switch, yeah, volt switch. Uh,
Yes.
but I don't know if he's going to be enough to like punch through. I don't know what the other huge offensive threats are, and with that huge ground weakness, you're going to be very weak to a lot of common threats. To top that off, uh, not crazy cleric support. While you have Komala with Wish, uh, you're gonna be very weak to status. Not
Mm-hmm.
really good access to aromatherapy unless you're bringing Illumise, which kind of breaks like the good middle like bulky offense that you got going with this team. Outside that, uh, it's got all the cores that I'd want to see. Good at water killing, good fighting, grass, water, fairy, dragon,
Mm-hmm.
steel. It's got most of the things I'm looking for. It's keeping up. It has to like keep up with all the other teams here in Sinnoh, which I feel are very strong, which is its biggest weakness. Ironically, I feel like it's the team that suffers the most by having such other good teams around it. Because I feel like if this was in
Mm-hmm.
Hoenn, for example, I would have rated this team very highly.
Yeah. It
Uh,
is a very good team here. The only problem that I could see happening is like the lack of reliable recovery necessarily. Like you said, we have the Kamala and you have the Regenerator from Slowking, but I feel like this team's going to get dwindled down very easy through mons that can just run Earthquake just because you're switching as Landorus, and it makes it very difficult to make like predictable or accurate like doubles to make sure that you're getting properly. So you're going to be relying more on the Zuru to just click U-turn every time, or Cinderace to click U-turn a lot to get in the mon you need, and that's going to be a problem if your opponent has hazards on the field and you have to bring in Feeny to defog when you want it to just not do that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I like where this team is. I like where it's going. I just feel like it could have been touched up a little bit better. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I
I'm
also
not
think
sure how I'd
Komo's
fix it
going to
either.
have to bring Stealth Rocks a lot.
Yeah. But that being said, it's good overall. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna hate on it anymore. It's still a good team. I think with good play, this team could take a lot of games, but I'll have to come down to the coach.
Yes.
All right, we got the Bolton we Weasels. I've never known how to pronounce this one.
I always call it Weasel.
All right.
But
I'll have you
so
go first again because you're higher on the rank.
yeah, so this might just be Lopunny bias for me, but I think Megalop is great, and I think that he built around it very well with the likes of Corviknight, Latios, Toxapex. The only problem I could potentially see with this team is having to go into more of a passive role, which would be not ideal. Like, it feels as if Megalopony is going to be one of the only breakers, but I think having access to stuff like Bulk Up, Corviknight, or Calm Mind Latios, or um, just any other things like that. Now that I'm looking at it, it's not really as offensive prominent as I thought, so I might rank this team a little lower, like if I were to go back and look at it. But I think it's interesting, especially since you're not going to be 100% reliant on Aromatisse for Wish Pass, since you have Latios there if you really needed it. Like, I really do enjoy this team at first glance. It does kind of feel like it's just lacking another, like, wall breaker if I were to fix anything for this.
Yeah, I would have loved to see Latios be Latios, but obviously that's not, feasible in round 3 most of the time. Uh, my big notes for this team was it's got most everything that it wants, but has a big speed tier drop off after Latios.
Yeah.
And that will, I think, hurt this team a lot. Of course, it does have sticky webs on Vikavolt, but
Mhm.
I didn't factor that in as much because the first 4 Pokemon on this team, Lopunny to Toxapex, feel very mandatory if you're wanting to win games.
Yeah.
And then I feel like the rest of the crew is interchangeable, but your opponent will almost always prep for those first 4 because they work off of each other very well. I see why they
Mhm.
were drafted together, right? Very good
Yeah.
cohesion, almost to a fault, because you just spent so many points on all of them together.
Mhm.
Um, that being said, I mean, the team's got good Pokemon. I'm not gonna knock on Toxapex Latios. It's got good ways to win, but I think it's going to rely more on your opponent
Mhm.
making mistakes than you making good plays.
Yeah, again, now that I look back on it, I probably would lower this a little bit just because it probably will struggle with balanced teams, just because it can't necessarily break through certain types too well. Like, this team is probably going to struggle breaking through bulky psychics. I think Vikavolt going to come a lot more than it's going to want to just because of this and the need to cover the speed tiers.
And like as you were saying, even though like this is a very specific example, outside of like Chandelure, you're gonna have a very hard time beating through stuff like Jirachi or Bronzong.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if there's a Metagross out there, same issue, right? Like it's it's got some good things going. Like I said, most of the teams in Sinnoh here, I've rated very highly. So I'm looking at my ranking here, and this would have been like maybe like an 8 for me
Hmm.
in the Hoenn division, but here it sits at 13th.
Yeah. There
Still a
was a
very good
big,
team.
like, for me, anywhere from like 5 through like 8 or 9, they all felt interchangeable for me. So that's just like something I want to point out there. So like there are flaws for these teams, but just a matter of which ones I would rather have. Like I like more of a balanced style, so that's probably more why I leaned more towards this more than the others.
I mean, I like a balanced style too, but I feel like once again, your speed tier issue, you kind of have to bring Vikavolt for webs, and then you're at like
Mm-hmm.
5 Mon that are coming every week. I don't know. And
Does feel like
I
there's just
hate
lacking that
relying on
big breaker.
webs.
Yeah,
All
oh,
right.
that's all I've got for that team.
Yeah, and to the coach, I still think your team's great. Don't take it to
Mm-hmm.
heart.
Yes.
All right, and we got the St. Joseph Haluchas. I'll take this one because I like this team
Okay.
a lot. I do have a little bit of bias to the Celebi. I think Celebi's sick. Although I think it's definitely gotten worse as the gen's gone on. Um, where I took points from this team, specifically, the biggest area that this team lost points was hazard removal. Oh boy. Uh, Rotom Frost, not Frost, Rotom Wash, Defog, and I believe Celebi is your only other defogger. And I'm not going to give Mega Diance's Magic Bounce
Yeah.
hazard removal points.
Mm.
You have 6 setters, but 2 removers, and that means Stealth Rocks are going to hurt a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Outside that, though, I like a lot of things that this team's got going. Um, Mega Diancie requires you to be Mega Evolved, like I said, but you got an amazing defensive core between Umbreon and Registeel, which I think work amazingly together. It's one of the best. I think like Umbreon and Registeel work. The only other mon that really comes to mind would be the fairy one. What's that one's name?
The fairy what again?
The fairy
The
evolution.
fairy. Oh, Sylveon.
Sylveon, yes. Uh, Sylveon would be like the only other evolution that I think would really work well with Registeel and one of its best partners. Uh, outside that, I think once again, it'll if the opponent's team is very hazard focused, it will be hard for this team to keep up. But
Mm-hmm.
it's got some wonderful offensive pressures, some good defensive backbone. I think if this team is played as a very all-in, toss your hazards and go offensive pressure, heck, even just going 1 for 1 most of the time, I think this team has the ability to come out on top between Diancie and Ferdinand and Helgo,
Mm-hmm.
and then falling back to its Registeel and Umbreon on turns that really needs to take off.
Yeah. I don't know. So I'm actually quite the opposite here for you about this team. I'm not a Celebi fan, and like you said, it's got worse as the gens got on. I used to enjoy it a lot, but with as many mons that are getting U-turn now, I don't think a team that wants to be offensively, like it wants to play offensively, likes to have a Celebi. Even Umbreon doesn't want to come in and take a U-turn, and then you're relying on Registeel for that. Um, I also am not a big fan of Celebi being the bulky psychic for this team, because I think that fighting types already run through it, and most fighting types tend to run U-turn. So I feel like offensive fighting types are going to be a problem. And the only other thing that I'm gonna say like negative about this team, because don't get me wrong, I do like the Mega Diancie and Fernape Rotom Wash, like those kind of mons. I just don't understand the no Lego for this team. You already have a special rock type here. I feel like something like a Crobat. It would cover the speed tier. It'd have 130, and it would be another defogger for you, and you wouldn't have to have the double up on the special rock type. The only thing I can necessarily see it for would be scarf sets so you can get the beast boost off. But other than that, I don't really understand the nil Lego here.
I don't know. I feel like it's going to be one of the every week. I don't feel like you always have to bring your Mega Diancie, although you're going to be wanting your fairy type, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I like it. I think it's cool. I always like the Beast Boost Pokemon. There's ways to instantly win games. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps another one would be better, maybe like something like Kartana and then switching out to Celebi for something else,
Yeah.
but that's pretty nitpicky in my opinion, and I actually quite like this team.
Yeah. It's got a lot of good things going for it. I think Zygarde 10 is not as bad as people bring it out to be,
No, not
especially
at all.
since you you have ways to break through the water types for this team through the likes of Infernape and Lego.
Yeah. All right, and
That's
then
all
I
I've got for
think
that
we
team.
can move on to the next one.
Hmm.
All right, and unfortunately, we do have a team coming up here in the last, and we both agree.
Hmm.
Technically, I have them rated higher, so I guess I'll start on them. Man, there's a lot of holes in this team, in my opinion. Uh,
Yes, yes.
Fire, water, grass. Ludicolo is taking up 2 points in that, being your grass and water. I mean, you have Milotic, but like being a water grass in the core makes it kind of weak to the fire type or water type it should be checking, you know? Um, then on the fairy dragon steel side, uh, Mawile, and then missing a dragon.
Oh, they've got
The
Dragalge.
core. Oh, they have Dragalge? One second, let me see here. I think I put here that they have Dragalge, but is specifically a slower. While is hard hitting, is slower. Uh,
Gotcha,
but being
gotcha.
both steel and fairy hits it so hard.
Hmm.
Oh, I feel like you don't want Mega Mawile being your defensive end of that core.
Yeah.
It might be able to do one or the other, but having to do both, once it's gone, Draco Meteors are just going to start raining over this team, and it's
Hmm.
going to very quickly tear it apart, I feel like. Um, only 3 hazard setters removers, so minor points taken away there. Ludicolo is really your only water resist, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of a water killer it's going to be. Speed tiers are almost where I'd like them to be. And you might have some, like, trick room shenaniganeries.
Hmm.
But, like, your setters aren't, like, the most ideals. I feel like. Like, Sigalith. I don't
There's
know.
just, it feels like there's just a lot missing here. But like you said, the grass type being Ludicolo, your earthquake switching being Landorus Therian, which is at least a little better. But there's a lot here. Having a big speed gap is not ideal. I get that Sigilyph it's 97, but it's typically not going to come max speed. At least from what I've seen, it's not really ran offensively. Granted, I did take a year and a half break. I don't know if there's any crazy like Sigilyph tech that people have been running lately, but having 110 Mons being able to run Modest or Adamant, I don't think is very ideal for this team. And not having an Electric is a big turnoff for me. As you had mentioned, this team doesn't break through Bulky Waters well at all.
Yeah,
And
it's just I feel like I don't know. Also, it's Ludicolo without rain. Like,
yeah, I don't know. There's just I feel like this team needs a lot of help through. I don't know. It just needs something. But I do like the Dragalge being a pick here. I haven't seen it drafted in a minute, so being able to see it drafted is nice. And I am always a big fan of Porygon too. So
if I were to try, if I just looking at this team, what I'd do is I think I'd take your 5 points on Munchlax elsewhere. I think Mega Mawile. I don't know what Megas are left. Might have to go Mega List, but like I don't know. Mega Mawile is such a strong
mhm.
Pokemon, but I just don't feel like it has the support necessary to make it that terrifying threat that you often see it be.
Just
And
feel
it's,
like it needs to be better built around it.
yeah, it needs to be better built around it. Uh, like I said, making it have to take on a defensive role is kind of awkward.
Hmm. But yeah, that's all I've got for this team.
Yeah, and once again, that being said, not too low on my scores overall, but definitely was one of the teams that I docked most across the board. I feel
Hmm.
like it could get taken advantage of with all the other wonderful teams that we have here in Sinnoh. All right, we have very different opinions on this
Yeah.
team.
Okay.
First
Yeah, you
off,
can go ahead and go first.
wonderful team name. All right, you drafted your mascot with Mega Shrek. the Swampert. So like props. Um, it's a rain team, right? You got your Politoed, Mega Swampert. You know, there's a lot that I like here. You got Zapdos, which I think works well on rain teams. Uh, you have Moisture Cores, though the thing that I think this team is the weakest at is its hazards with 3 setters and 2 removers. Speed tiers can be a little bit wonky, but hopefully with Swampert and Rain won't be the biggest deal. I like a lot about this team. Um, I'm assuming that Zapdos is going to be offensive for the most part in this power ranking, although it can be defensive, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
Um, it's missing a cleric for Metagross, and that's kind of like bulking your steel there. And I don't know, I don't really like bulky Metagross, but I could see it run like a really sick AV set. Maybe I'm a little
Hmm.
bit biased towards Rain, but I think this team has some good stuff going for it, just not the most crazy good stuff. There's a lot of good here. I think, Rain teams are always predictable, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but I think if piloted well, I feel like this team, and as long as it tries to keep up the pressure, can do very good. The only thing that kind of feels awkward is maybe Charizard on a Rain team, but like,
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the notes I have here. I have it in parentheses as 2 defog, with your defoggers being Zapdos and Charizard. Um, Once they get Stealth Rocks up, you're either going to lose momentum with Rain on Zapdos, or you're going to take hazard damage every time that it wants to come in, which on a Rain team is not necessarily ideal. I do like, however, Grimmsnarl on this team. I think that
mm,
having screens to set up for Rain for Mega Swampert is going to do very well. And I also like the idea of having, I forget whether it's Healing Wish or Lunar Dance that Cresselia gets, to where you like kill
Lunar Dance
yourself
is
and
where
then
it
they go
kills
in.
itself. Yes, I believe.
Yes, Lunar Dance to be able to get in Politoed and get Swampert in. I think that is going to be reliant on Swampert, and especially since it is the electric switch in on this team, as I believe it is the only thing that's not immediately, um, it's the only thing that resists it. As and against a rain team, having electric momentum is going to be very hard to stop. Like say you get like a Thunderous or something against this team, it's just going to tear right through. But having a Cresselia, I think, is going to help a little bit. Having it with the Slowbro is kind of awkward, but I feel like Cress is fine here just for the reasons I mentioned before. I think it has potential, but it's going to be very matchup dependent. And I think that potentially bulky grasses could also be a problem if Zapdos isn't ran offensively or have Hurricane with it.
But speaking of bulky grass, doesn't Chestnut also resist electric? I know it's not immune.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Sorry, that's my bad.
Yeah,
I
so I
didn't
mean
miss that.
it can kind of take some electric hits, but isn't I feel like most of your electric attackers are going to be on the special side. And if I off the top of my head, I remember Chestnut being much more physically defensive.
Yes.
So your point still kind of stands, but I just felt like it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, that is true. I'm just kind of glancing through this again, but yeah, that does help it a little bit. I like Chestnut for the reason I like Buzzwole, and that's to be a fighting check,
Hmm.
which again this team doesn't necessarily need, but being able to resist electric is going to be really big for this team. I might have been harsh in the 14 ranking, but that's also because I was expecting another rain sweeper to go with this team. Like a Politoed, I mean, like a Ludicolo, that very well could have been sniped. I don't know what the plan was in draft there, but I thought that was kind of awkward.
Yeah, I mean you don't even need something crazy. Like something I
Hmm.
believe Omastar is like what 3 points.
Yeah.
You know, that'd give you another setter. Wouldn't give you a remover, because I don't think it gets rapid spin for some reason. But I could see that point. I think it's middle tiering. I see this team taking wins with Swampert, so I'm not gonna.
Hmm.
I see the win con.
Yeah. Just a matter of playing around it.
Exactly.
But
All
that's all
right,
I've got for this team.
then we can move on. Uh, into the Indian Absols.
First team without a logo for this division, sad.
Yes, very sad.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start talking about this one. At first glance, I thought that this team was going to be really good. I saw Deoxys, and I like Deoxys. to a certain extent. And then I saw Rillaboom Zygarde, which I thought was interesting. But having it to where it's not, I believe Thousand Arrows is not cut in half, correct?
I believe so as well.
Okay, so that at least kind of makes up for Excadrill, but it forces Excadrill to run the likes of like Stomping Tantrum. So grassy terrain doesn't necessarily hinder its earthquaking ability. I thought that that was just really awkward to have Rillaboom with sand, just because the earthquake being cut down, and then having um, just I guess you do have two spinners in Excadrill and Hitmontop, but you're not really rapid spinning with Excadrill on this team, as you're looking at it as it more of a sweeper with Tyranitar.
And something in my notes, right? Like I think I could get the reason why Rillaboom was picked. Actually, Rillaboom
Mm-hmm.
makes a little bit more sense when you see that your Sand Core between Tyranitar and Excadrill are both weak to ground.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of shoring up your own ground weakness against EQ, but in a very odd way, where now
Yeah,
you're running high horsepower. You know what I mean?
yeah, not stopping tantrum. That's my fault, but yes,
Yeah. It's the same kind of same difference, right? But
yeah.
it's very interesting. I feel like if it gets pulled off, it's gonna be crazy. It's gonna
Mm-hmm.
look amazing and it's gonna be very stylish. That being said, will it be pulled off? This team doesn't really break through waters very easily outside of Rillaboom, which is kind of your weird combo non-bow.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, speed tiers, I kind of took some points because you have Deoxys way up there. And
Yeah,
then you concede like all of 100 to 120.
yeah,
And that could be very detrimental. You're now allowing like certain mons like Latios, and their like to start running modest instead of timid.
mm-hmm.
Because they might be like, well, if Zygarde DDs anyways, then it's not going to matter.
Yeah,
And that could be very bad. That could hurt
mm-hmm.
you a lot. That can be the difference between KOs and surviving, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
It
outside that,
does.
it's got most of its cores outside of a fire type,
Yeah, I mean
and
it.
not very good ground immunity again. What
Yeah,
here is immune to ground is just Murkrow. So once again, Rillaboom has a lot placed on it, which once again is kind of non-bow comboing your team. Very awkward, but could be good? Question
yeah.
mark?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like why we have it like where we were. It's just like we see the potential, but it's just like it's kind of awkward. I am a big advocate for a good electric type, so not seeing that is kind of upsetting.
Right? Having a good electric type would also help you break your waters.
Mhm.
Uh, it's I want to watch this team's games
Yeah.
most of the season. I
Yeah,
want to watch this team's replays.
yeah, that's a good way to put that there. Yeah. I'm curious. I
Yeah,
think poison on Quillfish is interesting, but
this is a very
I don't know.
interesting science experiment to me.
Mhm.
If this team goes crazy, that'll be sick. But otherwise, I could just see it being really counterintuitive into itself.
Mhm. I guess we'll
Because
have to wait and see.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm talking on it a while, but like Deoxys speed wanting to set like hazards, and like hazards are really good in sand because you're stacking chip, but then you have the regen from grassy terrain. It's just all over the
Yeah, it does
place.
seem really, really kind of counterintuitive.
But I think that's all we need to say. I mean, I feel like I could talk
Mhm.
about this team for the next 20, 30 minutes. So
Yeah.
best cut me off now.
Yeah. Go ahead, just go to the next one.
All right, and we got the Yuba City Yveltal.
Okay, you've got this one a little higher if you want to go ahead and talk about this one.
Yeah, now this team is missing just a little bit everywhere, but I don't know. I feel like it's still kind of good, you know?
Yeah.
It's it's missing a fire type. The Dragon Stab is missing, right? But
Yeah.
that it's a little bit less bad to me because I feel like having a steel and a fairy is a little bit more important than having a dragon.
I fully agree.
Bad hazard removal, which is going to hurt Beedrill, right? I think you only have two ways to get rid of hazards. One of them is Glysacore, and the other is Zapdos, correct? Or is it
I
Beedrill? It
believe
might
so,
be
yeah.
Beedrill. It might be Beedrill with
Oh, wait,
Defog.
yeah. Yes, yes.
Um,
Galar Zapdos doesn't get it.
yeah, it doesn't get it. And then the speed tier is a little bit off, you know?
Hmm.
But that being said, I think the core of this team has a lot of good stuff going. You have Bidoof, the strongest Pokemon in draft. Melmetal and Sylveon, which is like very similar to the Registeel combo I was talking about
Hmm.
earlier. Uh, Glysacore and Slowbro. I kind of, in my mind, Glysacore is like a half regenerator Pokemon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It it very quickly will heal up, and with Slowbro, I think that's a great pairing. You know,
Hmm.
like I don't know, like I feel like this is a very very mid-rangey like offensive team to me. I just
Yeah.
like it a lot. Uh, I feel like you have the offensive power you need. I feel like you have the defensive power you need. Whether or not you have the win con is kind of where I took the points out why it's not rated higher. Um,
Yeah.
you know, Ditto is very cool. Ditto could be your win con if you're just like, okay, my opponent set up 20 Dragon Dances and sweep through them with their own
Yeah.
moves. But like, I'm very interested to see how this team will come through. I feel like this team could be
Hmm.
ran a couple different ways. It's just whether or not they'll be able to bring their Bidoof sweep to the
Yeah.
level it needs to be, you know?
Yeah. As many Bidoof sweeps as we're expecting. For the most part, I feel like it's just going to be the first 8 Mons coming. Like, Thwacky seems kind of counterintuitive with this team with the Crocodile. I get it, like, it helps with Melmetal and Earthquake, but it also hinders Gliscor actually using Stab Earthquake. And the passive feeling is going to be nice for the likes of Melmetal and Slowbro, but I don't know. Thwacky feels kind of awkward to me with this team. I feel like the first 8 are going to come like a majority of the time, but I think having Thunderous Kick on Zapdos paired with Beedrill is going to make it to where Beedrill gets a lot of kills,
Hmm.
assuming that the situations occur that way. But like you had mentioned, I think the speed tiers are kind of awkward because you have the 100 to 145 gap there. So if you get something like a Cinderace, then they're going to be able to run Adamant just because of that. And I feel like there are some holes with this team, but I think this is just a good middle ground team. The only other comment I had was most of his team is physically offensive. And I feel like that could be a problem if you get a physical wall, as you're going to be very heavily reliant on Sylveon.
I mean, Haunter can do it. If I remember correctly, Haunter actually has a monster special attack stat for being a pre-evolution.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah,
see where you're coming from there.
yeah. That's all I've got for that team. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I just think it's a very cool team. It's got little holes everywhere, but like not enough
Hmm.
like leaks to sink the ship, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think it'll do okay.
I agreed. All right, and we both agree on this one. It's very interesting that I feel like most of the time at like the bottom you tend to have a little bit more, uh, oh, I think this team's like 14, this team's like 11,
Yeah, there's just
But
a couple differences, but
with
yeah,
in the majority of Sinnoh here, I feel like we are very in agree what's top and middle, and then what comes down towards the bottom. So I'll let you start
yeah.
for this team.
All right, so looking at this team, it makes me realize why other teams are lacking hazard removal, because this team has it all. It has Superior, Savali, Skarmory, Starmie, which is great because you're going to have Shedinja coming all the time. But I think the Dragon Fairy Steel Core is lacking because of the lack of Fairy. Um, Skarmory's good and all, but again, not having a Fairy is going to hurt it a lot. Um, and you have the Firewater Grass Core, which I think's great. This team just feels too offensive for me. Like to not, I don't know how I want to word it, but similar to the last team, like the first 8 are probably going to come a majority of the time. You can get cheeky with Wobbuffet trapping, but like other than that, I don't know. This team just feels like it's weak to a lot of things, and but whether it be like hyper offense or just standard bulky teams, like it's full of wall breakers, but there aren't really many sweepers. Like you have Zard, and I guess Terrakion could set up, but it a majority of the time wants to run a choice item.
Hmm. Yeah, and to me, this team I feel like is relying on Silvally way too much.
Mm-hmm.
Silvally simultaneously has to be your singular dark type and your singular fairy type. And it can't be Amon holding both immunities, right? If only it was a fairy dark here, then it would be perfect. But it will
Yeah.
be either fairy or dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of holds the team back a bit for me. That makes me very hesitant. I'm like, the speed tiers are pretty good across the board. You're missing like 120 plus, but like that's not the biggest deal in my opinion. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. Mm. I feel like this team will be hard to prep for, but not hard to beat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This team also really doesn't like going against Scarfers. And like you had mentioned with it being a dark type, I feel like it's going to have to come more dark than fairy just because of its ghost weakness.
Yeah, but if it doesn't come fairy, then you're just
Yeah, I know.
most
You're
most
down one
most
of them.
most dragons, right? I feel like have good access to fire type moves, and Skarmory is going to be feeling it real
Mm-hmm.
quick. Skarmory is
Yeah.
not as defensive as Corviknight on the special side,
Yeah, no.
and it won't be able to eat it multiple times.
Yeah.
I
It's
don't know.
just going to be dependent on if their offense can break through and be able to win with stuff like Scarf Terrakion or offensive Starmie.
Maybe like a Scarf Superior that's gone crazy to +6,
Mm-hmm.
But
One can only dream.
yeah, one can only dream. And I feel like that's kind of the issue here with this team. Uh,
Yeah.
it has the ways to win, but like I feel like it's a dream to get to those ways to win.
Mm-hmm. That's all I've got for this team.
All right, and then we got the Diggersbees, and you got them slightly higher, so I'm gonna let you take this one.
Okay, so this could just be a bias here. I like throw for the best nickname. I throw it back. But I think that this team has potential. I like how it's able to stop electrics relatively well. With the likes of Gastrodon and Gligar and having the Wish Pass support from Florges to be able to make sure that the Urshifu and Mega Arrow aren't. They don't have a team that's not going to be able to switch into electric types. So having those, I think, is going to be really important. That, and I think the offensive firepower through Victini, Darm, Urshifu, and Mega Arrow is almost unpreppable unless you have a bulky water, which of course this team does not really handle all that well. Again, due to the lack of electric type, which is not exactly very good. And I also think that this team's defog isn't that great. Like you have Mega Arrow and Gligar. I think Florges is going to bring defog more than you're going to want it to.
Yeah, and I think the biggest issue with this team, and I feel like I'm getting deja vu from the team
Mm-hmm.
with Galarian Damatan from Hoenn, is you have Darmanitan Galar, but Alomomola, Vaporeon,
Yeah.
Toxapex. What are you gonna do against these mons? Maybe you hit it with a psychic move with Vikini if it's Toxapex, but like, oh no, Shifu Rapid Strike gets walled horribly.
Mm-hmm.
Ferrothorn's gonna have to bring Power Whip. And Gastrodon can sit on opposing waters with Water Absorb, but it can't really beat them.
Yeah.
Like, uh, it feels like a waste.
Yeah. And that's sad to say. But I think that differential for these games are going to be close just because of the ability to run like Scarf Victini, Scarf Darm, and just be able to like go break through everything that isn't, like you had mentioned, a bulky water.
But that being said, I see this team losing one very specific way a lot. As you said, the defog options aren't the greatest, right?
Mm-hmm.
and there's no grounded poison type, which means if you run into T-spikes in a bulky water, you are
Yeah.
very quickly going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly. And that feels like a massive oversight to me, you
Yeah.
know? And not to mention, most offense is physical. You can run a special Victini, but, most time it's going to be physical.
Mm-hmm.
What's their special attacker? I don't see it. Is it Dracoloke? You know?
Yeah.
Florges is very strong special attacker, but is that really, do you want to be running Specs Florges every week? Like,
Yeah. It just feels a little lackluster.
yeah, it feels a little lackluster. I don't know. I feel like Urshifu Rapid is redundant, and if it
Mm-hmm.
became something else, it really Urshifu Rapid really wants to be Tapu Koko on this team. Like,
Yeah. Or even a Keldeo.
oh, I'm thinking something electric with Defog. A Zapdos would do
Yeah.
fantastic, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
I don't
know.
know. Well, I guess we'll see. Like I said, maybe they'll pick up a couple wins just because of their offensive firepower. It's
Right?
like I
Like,
said, it's just
maybe
gonna
they
be
will
a.
just punch through some teams, and we just don't
Mhm.
see it.
Yeah. It's always coach dependent as well, like we've mentioned before.
Yeah. Um, Definitely my least favorite team. Uh, I don't know what
Yeah.
else to say. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
it's
all
it's
I've
it's
got for
got
them.
some utility with Smeargle, but like not enough.
Yeah.
All right. And then
Ah.
here we are.
See, unfortunately, rather than best for last this time, it's gonna have to be worst for last, at least for both of our opinions. Again.
Yes, I agree.
Ah. I'll go ahead and tackle this one. Okay, so I don't necessarily know where to start. I'll just start at the top. So Dracovish. I saw Dracovish and Garchomp at first, and I was like, okay, maybe this can be sand. And then it wasn't.
Yeah,
And
actually,
then
let me read out, actually, if I can interrupt you,
go for it.
my entire paragraph that I've written on this team. Wow, what a team. I saw this and I was blown back. This team is nothing but threats. How did they let this happen? Which I think is a very strong gut reaction if you see this team, right?
Mm-hmm.
That being said, upon further inspection, it's missing so much. The team has
It is.
only offensive power, no defensive power, a singular defogger, and two setters.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no. If this
Yeah.
team loses momentum for a turn, it is all going to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
That on top of that, you only have three Pokemon with momentum moves. So
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to hold that momentum very well. That's my
Yeah.
issue with this team. It starts
Mm-hmm.
off with some Sand Core and then just goes full offensive power. Their most defensive Pokemon are Steelix, Mega Steelix, which is kind of mm, Whimsicott. Could run, I guess, like Assault Vest on almost any Pokemon on this team, but then you're locking into Assault Vest. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Having your Earthquake resist be Breloom or Whimsicott's definitely not ideal. I guess you do have
Uh huh.
uh Galarian Moltres, but I don't know. It just, like you had mentioned, it just feels like there's a lot of offensive firepower and the lack of I wrote down reliable recovery, but any recovery
Just
is
any. Like you have like
startling.
Leech Seed on Breloom, right?
Yeah.
Leech Seed on
Hmm.
Whimsicott.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I guess Galarian Moltres does get roost, but outside of that, I think that Tailwind Whimsicott could make this team interesting. Have like a Tapu Lele that's really fast, locked into Specs, Moonblast, or Psychic.
It could
Just roll
make
over teams.
Dracovish a very crazy
Hmm.
Pokemon, but like it's not as reliable as Sand for the speed, right? It's less
Hmm.
turns overall.
Yeah. Just feels like this team needs a Gigalith. Like, or something different. I
Hmm.
don't know. I do think the speed tiers are okay, though. That's the one thing that I will say about this team, that the speed tiers are pretty good.
Yeah, the speed tiers are pretty good. Has
But
I don't know. I feel like it has the wall breaking potential, right? But like nothing to fall back on.
yeah, nothing to sweep for the wall breakers. It's just pure,
Right.
pure power.
Just pure power. Mm.
Like Tyler won.
Exactly.
Just all power, nothing else.
I feel like a few really good changes could quickly make this team go from like
Hmm.
16th to like 3,
Yeah,
you know?
I fully agree.
But where it currently stands, you're gonna run into some issues.
Hmm. Like I said, if Gigalith, which I don't believe after going through this anyone has Gigalith. If you're listening to this, go pick up a Gigalith.
Eh,
That would make this team
Heck, even
so much
even a
better immediately.
Sandaconda,
Yes, just something. Something that
something.
makes Dracovish better. Is Sandvale allowed in this?
I believe so, yes.
Well, there you go. You've got Sandvale, Garchomp, so those Draco Meteors that no one ever hits are even less likely to hit.
Yep. Go pick up something to bring your sand.
Yeah.
Desperately, desperately bring a defogger that's a flying type.
Get a
Um,
wall, a single wall, please.
yeah, and I'm not talking like wall rain here.
Yes.
You know, hmm.
But
pick
I
up
hope
pick
this.
up some sand. Pick up something with
Mhm,
defog that's a flying type, specifically that isn't gonna get rocked by most, ground types out there.
mhm.
And
I
I
don't
think
know.
this team would be a lot better.
I just feel like a couple adjustments would make this good, like we've stated. But other than that, that's all I've got for these power rankings.
Yep, me as well.
So, any final thoughts on any of these teams?
Um, not particularly.
Yeah.
Uh, Overall, I think Sinnoh was very. I feel like most of the coaches here in Sinnoh got very good teams.
Mhm.
Uh, Looking at the very first 3 we looked at and going down the list, you know,
Mhm.
got some pretty solid teams just across the board. I feel like I was nitpicking a lot when it came
Mhm.
to having to figure out who went where.
Yeah, that's very true. I feel like it was a lot more difficult here than in the other region.
Yeah. So, it even to our coach of the Rio is your team still is very solid. It just needs 1 or 2 desperate
Mhm.
changes.
Yeah. Again, and these are just our opinions on the teams. If you go 8-0 on these teams, don't or however many weeks they are, don't come at us. These are just our opinions based purely off what we think the team state is at right now.
Yeah. And we're getting this one out here a little bit late, so there might have been some trades that have happened
Mhm.
that we're not aware of, but this is based off of the after grace period teams. So
Okay.
I
But
think
that's all
that's
I've got.
all for me as well. So
So,
any closing words?
if you're here and watching, thank you for sticking around, and hope anyone who did make it through this video has a great rest of their day.
Yeah, I think that's all I would say as well. So have a good rest of your season, and I wish all of you Sinnoh coaches the best of luck.
All right. See you guys.
All right, bye bye.